You know that specific moment when you're sitting at your desk, staring at the same screen you've looked at 1,000 times before, and suddenly you feel nothing. Not exhausted, not overwhelmed, not even truly sad, just absent. As if the version of you that once cared, the part that reacted to the emails, the deadlines, the endless office politics, quietly stood up and walked away without saying a word. And there you are, still sitting in the chair, holding the empty shell of a routine that no longer feels inhabited. What if that frightening inability to care is not a failure of discipline, but a signal from something deeper? What if your mind and body are no longer willing to participate in a life that has felt false for far too long? We've been taught to believe that motivation is the proof of a healthy mind, that if you can no longer force yourself forward, something inside you must be broken. But what if the opposite is true? What if the reason you cannot keep doing it anymore is not because you are collapsing, but because you are finally waking up? Carl Jung was not simply a psychiatrist. He was the chosen successor of Sigmund Freud, president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, and a man with a respected practice in Zurich. By every external standard of success, Jung had already won the game. He had reached the summit. And then the inner clockwork simply fell silent. It didn't happen because of a scandal or a physical illness. It was a total internal collapse of meaning. The theories that had defined his life suddenly felt like dry dust. The prestigious lectures felt like theater. Jung found himself in a state of disorientation so profound that he could no longer function in the professional world he helped build. He retreated to his home on the shores of Lake Zurich. And there, the most brilliant mind in Europe began doing something baffling. He walked down to the water's edge every single day and played. He gathered stones. He dug in the mud. He built small towers, tiny cottages, and an entire miniature village. To his colleagues and peers, this was the tragic end of a legend. They wrote letters of concern, whispering about a nervous breakdown. After all, what else do you call a grown man, a man of science, spending his afternoons building sandcastles while his career turns to ash? But Jung wasn't losing his mind. He was having what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. He realized that for decades he had been living a rational life, a life of roles, titles, and intellectual structures. But that rational life had become a prison that excluded his soul. By building those stone towers, he was bypassing his ego and speaking directly to a deeper part of himself that the modern world had forced him to silence. This is the lesson the 9-to-5 world is terrified for you to learn. Sometimes the rational life, the one with the steady paycheck, the clear title, and the socially accepted routine, is the actual madness. And the breakdown, the inability to keep performing, is actually the first moment of sanity you've had in years. Jung stayed in this unproductive, inexplicable space for a long time. He didn't rush back to fix himself. He understood that you cannot build a new life while you are still desperately clinging to the blueprints of the old one. To understand why the 9-to-5 feels like a cage, you first have to understand how you were taught to navigate the world. From the moment we are born, we are handed a compass. It isn't a physical object, but a psychological architecture, a map of what a good life is supposed to look like. This compass was calibrated by your family's expectations, by your culture's definition of success, and by the unspoken social agreement that security is worth whatever part of yourself you have to trade for it. For years, this compass worked. It pointed toward the promotion, the mortgage, the ticked box, and the steady climb. And because everyone around you, your boss, your friends, your parents, was using the same compass pointing in the same direction, it didn't just feel like a choice. It felt like reality itself. It felt like true north. But then, something shifted. There was no announcement, no sudden lightning bolt. It was more like a slow internal pressure that crossed a threshold one day and never went back. Somewhere deep in your unconscious, the needle moved. Suddenly, the true north you've been following for a decade is no longer north. It's not that you've lost direction. It's that the direction you've been following no longer belongs to you. And once you cross that internal threshold, something strange begins to happen. The world starts sounding different. You sit in meetings, listening to the endless language of productivity synergy, deliverables, quarterly goals, and suddenly it all feels like static noise. As if everyone around you is speaking a dialect you once understood but can no longer translate. You watch your coworkers nod seriously over spreadsheets and deadlines, fully invested in conversations that now feel strangely unreal. And what rises inside you is not arrogance or cynicism. It's alienation, a deep and unsettling realization that your mind can no longer resonate with something fundamentally disconnected from your nature. This is where the real suffering begins, but not in the way most people imagine. We tend to believe the pain comes from the job itself, the exhausting schedule, the difficult manager, the repetitive tasks. But there are people doing work far harder than yours who still feel alive inside it. The suffering is not caused by the workload. The suffering is caused by the distance. Imagine standing on a road while holding a compass that keeps pulling your heart somewhere else, toward a mountain range far to the west, toward meaning, toward depth, toward a life that feels genuinely yours. And yet every day you continue walking in the opposite direction. But your feet are still standing on the old path, walking east, because that's where the office is. The exhaustion you feel every morning isn't physical. It is the sheer psychic strain of trying to walk east, while your soul is pulling west. It is the tension of the stretch. The further you travel down the wrong path, the more you succeed in the provisional life, while your compass points elsewhere, the tighter that internal string pulls. Eventually, the tension becomes so great that you simply stop. You freeze. You can no longer move forward because to take one more step in the old direction feels like it will snap you in half. Most people look at this frozen state and see a malfunction. They see a car that won't start. But your soul sees a safety mechanism. Your compass is working with genuine accuracy for the first time in your life. It is stubbornly, persistently refusing to let you go any further in a direction your life was never designed to accommodate. Hasn't broken. It has finally found the truth. And the truth is, you can no longer survive in a blueprint drawn by someone who never met the real you. We live in a culture that worships the mind and ignores the machine. We've been conditioned to believe that our bodies are just biological vehicles, slaves to our willpower. We think that if we're tired, we can simply add more caffeine. If we are unmotivated, we can just watch a 3-minute hustle video and force our way through the afternoon. We treat pushing through as a virtue. But Jung understood something that modern productivity culture has spent a century trying to bury. The body is not a system running parallel to the psyche. It is the psyche's most honest spokesperson. When your conscious mind, the part of you that worries about bills, titles, and professionalism, refuses to listen to your soul, your body takes over the conversation. It begins to speak a language that gets harder to ignore the longer you refuse to hear it. Have you felt it? It's that specific, heavy, physical weight that settles in your chest on Sunday evening. It isn't because your job is hard or because you have too many emails. It's because your body knows that Monday morning requires you to perform a version of yourself that has been vacating the premises for months. It is the physical sensation of a mask being forced back onto a face that has outgrown it. Then there is the exhaustion. Not the I stayed up too late kind of tired, but a cellular fatigue that 12 hours of sleep cannot touch. You wake up feeling like you've been running a marathon in your dreams. This is because, in a very real sense, you have. Carl Jung spoke about this through a concept he called psychic energy. He wasn't referring to energy in a vague or mystical sense. He meant it as something very real, a limited internal resource. Every person wakes up each day with only a certain amount of psychological currency to spend. And when your work aligns with your deeper nature, that energy tends to regenerate. You give something, and in return, something inside you comes alive. But when you are constantly performing, when you spend 8 hours a day pretending to care about things that feel empty to you, speaking in a professional voice that doesn't sound like your own, suppressing your instincts just to remain acceptable, you are spending energy without replenishment. Little by little, you begin paying what could only be described as a self-betrayal tax. And that tax compounds over time. The performance itself becomes exhausting, not because the tasks are impossible, but because maintaining a version of yourself that isn't real consumes enormous psychological energy. The cost is not only your time, it is your vitality. The exhaustion you feel is often the moment your inner system realizes something unsustainable is happening. So it begins shutting power down in the areas it considers non-essential, just to keep the functional self alive. Creativity fades, joy becomes distant, desire weakens. The deeper parts of you go quiet, simply so the performance can continue a little longer. Eventually, the body stops negotiating. It starts producing a dull, instinctive closing down. You see an email notification from your boss, and before your brain has even finished reading the subject line, your stomach knots. Your shoulders rise. Your breath becomes shallow. These are not symptoms of a disorder. This is the body's compensatory function, doing exactly what Jung described. It is making the cost of self-betrayal so high, so physically painful, that you eventually cannot keep affording it. The voice in your head might call you lazy. It might point to others who manage just fine. But remember, those people are navigating with their original compasses. They aren't betraying themselves because they haven't woken up yet. But you've seen behind the curtain, and your body knows that you can no longer survive on the crumbs of a provisional life. The exhaustion isn't the problem. The performance was the problem. The exhaustion is just the moment the mask finally cracked under the weight of the truth. There is a quiet, devastating condition that plagues the modern world, one that doesn't show up on a blood test, but can drain a human being of their entire existence. Carl Jung called it the provisional life. The provisional life is the psychological state of living in permanent preparation for a reality that never actually begins. It is the life of not yet. You know the internal monologue. I'll start my real work after this promotion. I'll focus on my passion after the kids are out of school. I'll speak my truth once I have a bit more in savings. It is a life lived in a perpetual waiting room. You're standing by the door, ticket in hand, watching the clock, telling yourself that this current version of you, the one answering emails and attending the 9 to 5, is just a temporary stand-in, a placeholder. Jung saw this as one of the most tragic patterns in human psychology. People don't just spend months in the provisional life, they spend decades. They live almost tolerating instead of inhabiting. They treat their current days as a rehearsal for a performance that is always scheduled for next year. For a long time, the waiting room is comfortable. It's warm. It's safe. It offers the comforting illusion of progress without requiring the risk of truly beginning. But then something shifts. The awakening arrives. And when your internal compass recalibrates, the provisional life, the life built on delay, compromise, and performance, changes completely. The distance between who you truly are and who you have been pretending to be suddenly disappears. And that is why it starts to feel unbearable. Because awakening destroys your ability to rationalize. Before, you could still tell yourself the familiar lie. Just one more year, just a little longer, and part of you believed it. There was enough separation between you and your own truth to keep the performance alive. But after the awakening, that separation collapses. Meaning, which once felt optional, a luxury even, suddenly becomes the only thing your system is willing to accept in exchange for your energy. And something deeper inside you stops negotiating. The waiting room you once tolerated no longer feels safe. It feels suffocating. The fluorescent lights in the office, the ones you barely noticed before, now feel like they are draining the color out of your inner life. The empty conversations near the coffee machine no longer feel harmless. They begin to feel like an assault on your sense of authenticity. The salary and the status, the very things that used to make the waiting room bearable, stop functioning as valid responses to the questions your conscience is now asking. Jung observed that when a person reaches this threshold, their willingness to have nothing, rather than keep performing something false, reads to the outside world as recklessness. And your friends might think you're having a midlife crisis. Your family might call you irresponsible. They see someone walking out of a perfectly good building into a storm. But from the inside, it is the most sophisticated act of self-preservation you have ever performed. You aren't being irresponsible. You are refusing to live in rehearsal for a life that was always supposed to have already started. You are realizing that the real life you are waiting for isn't the destination you arrive at after your 9 to 5 career. It is the very ground you are standing on. The provisional life is a slow death by 1,000 laters. Awakening is the moment you realize that the door to the waiting room was never locked. You were just waiting for a permission slip that was never going to come. And once you see that door is open, you can never quite get comfortable in the chair again. As you stand in the wreckage of your old life, a voice is going to arrive. It will sound like common sense. It will sound like your concerned mother, your successful college friend, or the logical part of your own brain. It will whisper, "Look at everyone else. They have mortgages and titles and security. They're managing just fine. They're exhausted, sure, but they're showing up. Why can't you just get it together? Why do you have to be so difficult. This is the final trap. It is the fear of being left behind. It's the terrifying feeling that while you are off finding yourself, the rest of the world is moving forward, building wealth, and securing their place in the sun. It makes you feel like a child who has wandered off the path, while the adults continue the march toward the destination. But here is the direct answer to that voice. They are navigating with the original compass. Their needle is still pointing toward the true north that society calibrated for them. That is not their failure, and it is not your instruction manual. Your compass has moved. Through a process of awakening you didn't ask for, your internal needle has recalibrated. It is pointing toward a continent that doesn't exist on their maps. You cannot use an old map to navigate a new territory. To try and get it together and follow them would be like trying to sail a ship across a mountain range just because everyone else is walking. You are in a different geography now. This leads you to a sacred choice. It is the most difficult decision a human being can make. It is the choice between nothingness and falseness. Most people choose falseness. They choose to keep the job they hate, the marriage that is dead, and the persona that is a lie, because the nothingness of the unknown is too terrifying to face. But for the awakened soul, falseness is a slow-motion suicide. To choose falseness is to agree to stay in the waiting room of your own life until you die. Choosing nothingness, choosing the void, the gap, the period of being unsuccessful by the world's standards, is a sacred act. It is an act of faith in the psyche. It is saying, I would rather have nothing than be a lie. We have to perform a psychological inversion. The world tells you the 9 to 5 is safety. They say the steady paycheck and the corporate structure are the walls that protect you from the chaos of the world. But for an awakened soul, that office is the most dangerous place on earth. Why? Because it is a place where authenticity is slowly exchanged for comfort. A place where instinct is buried beneath procedure. A place that rewards you for ignoring the very signals your inner life keeps sending in order to protect you. The 9 to 5 is often presented as security, but for many people, it becomes something quieter and far more dangerous. A gradual erosion of the self. And being left behind by that system may not be the tragedy you think it is. Sometimes it is the beginning of escape. You are not losing your place in the world. You are beginning to reclaim your place within your own life. And the people you fear leaving behind are often people who've not yet realized how disconnected they feel themselves. So don't keep looking backward. There is another landscape waiting ahead of you. But where does that leave you now? If you can no longer return to the old life, yet the new one has not fully appeared, then you have entered what Carl Jung described as a liminal space, a threshold. The strange and uncomfortable in-between, where the version of yourself that no longer fits has already begun to disappear, while the person you are becoming has not fully arrived. Spiritual awakening deposits you here without asking. And it is a lonely place. The exhaustion, the refusal to perform, the search for meaning that has stopped being optional. None of this is the chaos of things falling apart. It is the specific, necessary pressure of something being built in the only conditions under which it can be built. You are not behind. You are not lazy. And you are certainly not a malfunction. You are simply an architect standing in an empty field. You cannot build what your heart is pointing toward while you are still standing inside someone else's blueprint. The reason you feel so lost is that you are creating a life for which there is no map. And that is the most courageous work a human being can do. The people who come out the other side of this are those who finally took their internal compass seriously, even when the rest of the world called it a breakdown. You are exactly where you need to be before the most important chapter of your life begins. It is deeply inconvenient, and it is also completely true. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you loved yourself the way you've always wished your career would love you, what would you stop doing today? Would you stop taking that 8 a.m. call that makes your stomach turn? Would you stop saying yes to projects that have no soul? Would you stop pretending that the title on your LinkedIn profile is the sum total of who you are? The world tells you that to change your life, you need a massive plan. You are told that before you can leave the old life behind, you need a bridge, a budget, a backup plan, a perfect safety net. But the life of Carl Jung suggests something far more unsettling. Sometimes, the first thing you truly need is not a plan. It is a refusal. The courage to say no to the false version of yourself, even before you fully know who the real one is becoming. Because refusal is often the first act of creation. The moment you stop cooperating with what is empty, something deeper finally has room to emerge. And if these words reached a part of you that has been silent for too long, stay with the journey. There is still more to uncover about awakening, identity, and what it means to build a life from the inside out.